At first glance, West Ridge Correctional Facility looked like any other state prison. Rows of concrete, steel gates, and weary guards marking the long days. But behind those gates, a scandal was brewing. One that would lead to an inmate's mysterious death, an officer's quiet resignation, and a case that remains buried under red tape and silence. It was a deadly secret that, even years later, no one dares to speak of too loudly. The story begins with Darnell Hughes, a 26-year-old gay inmate serving time for nonviolent drug offenses. Darnell was smart, charismatic, and known for keeping to himself. Unlike many inmates, he had earned the trust of several guards by volunteering for library duty and inmate mentorship programs. But beneath his quiet demeanor was a man who knew how to navigate the prison system and the people who controlled it. One of those people was Officer Michael Turner, a well-liked but guarded corrections officer in his mid-30s. Turner had a reputation for being firm but fair. He kept his head down, followed the rules, and rarely drew attention. But behind his carefully constructed exterior was a secret that could destroy his life and career. Inmates talked. Rumors spread fast in prison. Whispers about Turner and Hughes meeting alone during late-night lockdowns or extended library shifts started circulating. While most dismissed them as gossip, a few inmates began to notice patterns, certain favors, unrecorded movements, and unusual interactions. Turner had always been strict about routine, but over time, his behavior subtly shifted. He began assigning himself to shifts where Darnell was working. Their interactions, though professional on the surface, were more frequent than necessary. One inmate later said, "It wasn't what they said, it was how they looked at each other, like they had a secret." Staff chalked it up to coincidence. After all, fraternization between officers and inmates was strictly forbidden. But the prison wasn't exactly a place where transparency thrived. Everyone had something to hide, and few wanted to be the one to stir up trouble. Then came the medical rumors. In late 2018, Darnell was transferred to the medical unit for what was described as routine testing. But after returning, he seemed withdrawn. He stopped mentoring, skipped library duty, and began avoiding Officer Turner. Fellow inmates noticed. So did other guards. When questioned, Darnell claimed he was just tired. A few weeks later, Turner requested reassignment to another wing of the facility. It was abrupt and unusual for someone who had spent years maintaining a consistent post. When pressed, he said he needed a change of pace. Shortly after Turner's reassignment, Darnell filed an informal grievance citing ongoing threats from another staff member. No names were listed. The report vanished into the bureaucratic void like so many others. 2 weeks later, Darnell was found unresponsive in his cell. The official report listed the cause as suicide, but the details didn't sit right. There were no signs of prior mental distress. He had recently written to his sister about plans for his parole hearing and mentioned, "A lot I'm ready to talk about." There were no suicide notes, no evidence of self-harm, and the timeline of events that night was suspiciously thin. Surveillance cameras on Darnell's block were mysteriously malfunctioning that evening. Guard logs were incomplete. The prison released a short statement. Inmate Darnell Hughes was found deceased in his cell. No foul play is suspected. But inside West Ridge, rumors exploded. Inmates whispered about a confrontation days before between Turner and Hughes. One claimed Turner had accused Darnell of ruining his life. Another said Turner had been visibly shaken during his last week on duty. Then came the bombshell. Darnell had tested positive for HIV shortly before his death. And Turner, married with 2 kids, had reportedly taken a sudden medical leave around the same time. The pieces were coming together, but no one in power wanted to connect them. The official story was sealed. The investigation closed. And Officer Turner quietly resigned a month later. No charges, no public inquiry, no justice, but the truth refused to stay buried. In forums, advocacy groups, and the whispered testimonies of former inmates, a darker story lives on. One of a secret relationship turned deadly, of stigma and fear, of a system that protected its own and silenced the rest. And this is just the beginning. After Darnell Hughes' death, The whispers inside West Ridge Correctional Facility didn't die down. They intensified. Inmate conversations grew sharper, coded in silence and glances, but loud enough for anyone paying attention to hear. Something about the way Darnell died, quietly, suddenly, and without warning, felt staged. And Officer Michael Turner? Gone without a trace, almost as if he'd never worked there at all. But some remembered, and what they remembered was disturbing. In the months before Darnell's death, the secret relationship between him and Turner had grown more obvious to those closest to it. It wasn't just rumors anymore. A janitor recalled seeing the two in a secluded records room, well after regular hours. An inmate worker claimed Darnell had once returned from a meeting with Turner, shaken and angry. He said he didn't want to be part of it anymore. The inmate shared years later. He wanted out. The affair, once discreet, had begun to unravel. Darnell started pulling away, skipping duties that would put him in proximity to Turner. At the same time, Turner grew increasingly erratic, short-tempered during roll call, inattentive during his rounds. Some described it as paranoia. Others said he was desperate. Behind closed doors, Turner was living a double life. On the outside, he was a family man with a wife and 2 kids. On the inside, he was involved in a covert relationship that could not only destroy his career but his personal life. When Darnell tested positive for HIV, the balance tipped. According to internal sources, Turner found out through a breach of medical privacy, a whispered conversation between guards or an illegally accessed file. Whatever the means, the impact was explosive. Darnell's positive status introduced a new kind of pressure. Not only was Turner now entangled in a relationship that could ruin him, but he was also potentially exposed to a virus that carried immense stigma, especially within the closed, hypermasculine walls of a prison. One staff member later said, "It wasn't just fear, it was shame, fury, and desperation wrapped into one." Darnell confided in at least one fellow inmate that he feared for his safety. According to that inmate's statement, Darnell had said, "He's not going to let this come out. He has too much to lose." Whether Darnell was planning to go public or simply to end things, it's clear that Turner felt cornered. There were signs of escalation. Darnell began receiving cryptic notes, slipped under his cell door at night, saying things like, "Keep quiet," and "You know what happens to snitches." He reported feeling watched constantly, and once told a nurse that he had enemies in high places, but without naming names, his warnings were dismissed. Around this time, another informal grievance appeared in the system, and signed but typed on the facility's internal kiosk. It detailed an inappropriate relationship between an officer and an inmate, mentioned threats, and referenced medical retaliation. The grievance disappeared before it was ever investigated. Then there was the issue of Darnell's request for a protective transfer. Filed just 10 days before his death, the request cited ongoing intimidation from staff. According to official records, the request was denied due to insufficient evidence, but no one ever interviewed Darnell about the claim. Meanwhile, Turner was spiraling. Fellow officers noticed his frequent visits to the medical unit, asking vague questions about what inmates know about their rights and who's allowed to share test results. He started requesting vacation days he never used before, and some say he began sleeping in his car outside work hours. And then, just days before Darnell's death, Turner confronted him. The altercation wasn't documented, but several inmates later recounted a heated exchange in the library. Darnell allegedly shouted, "You can't scare me into silence," while Turner responded with a chilling, "You don't know what I'm capable of." After that moment, Darnell seemed resigned. He wrote a final letter to his sister, never mailed, that read, "If anything happens to me, tell them to look at the ones who wear the keys." The night he died, Darnell had no visitors, but a cellmate claimed he heard the door click, briefly unlocked and opened, around 2:13 a.m., just hours before Darnell was found unresponsive. No guards reported making rounds at that time, and no entry was logged. The surveillance footage was conveniently corrupted. Turner called out sick the next morning. 2 days later, he turned in his resignation. No formal connection was ever made. No arrest. no charges. But inside the prison, no one doubted what really happened. The secret affair wasn't just scandalous. It had become deadly. And with Darnell gone, the only person who could truly expose the truth had slipped away under the protection of silence. The official cause of death for Darnell Hughes was suicide. The report claimed he had fashioned a makeshift noose from a torn bed sheet and hung himself from a low pipe in his cell. But to those familiar with Darnell, and especially those who had seen the fear in his eyes during his final days, that explanation felt like an insult. The day after his death, Darnell's body was swiftly removed from the facility, faster than protocol typically allowed. His personal belongings were boxed up, with several items mysteriously missing, including his journal and a letter addressed to his sister. The prison's internal affairs team released a statement. No signs of foul play. The matter is closed. But closed didn't mean over. Inmates began speaking out. A few contacted advocacy groups, while others leaked their versions of events to local journalists. A former cellmate claimed he was moved to solitary hours after reporting what he'd heard that night. Another inmate alleged that guards warned him to forget anything he knew about Hughes and Turner. The most damning evidence came from a whistleblower within the prison staff. An anonymous correctional officer contacted an investigative reporter, revealing that Turner had unauthorized access to the cell block the night of Darnell's death. According to the whistleblower, Turner manually disabled the camera system by switching off the breaker from a locked maintenance panel, a move only accessible to staff. The logs confirming this? Missing. Even more suspicious was Turner's sudden resignation. He left without an exit interview, received full benefits, and moved out of state within a week. Attempts by local media to contact him were unsuccessful. His former department declined to comment, citing privacy regulations. The medical examiner's report further fueled suspicions. Though it ruled the death a suicide, it noted unexplained bruising on Darnell's arms and ribs, marks inconsistent with hanging. Toxicology was never fully performed. The blood samples, according to the coroner's office, had been lost. Outside the prison walls, Darnell's sister, Camille Hughes, began asking questions. She launched a public campaign demanding an independent investigation. She spoke at rallies, reached out to attorneys, and made appearances on local news programs. "My brother didn't kill himself," she said. "He was silenced." Civil rights groups joined her cause, calling out the lack of transparency and accountability. But every request for records, camera footage, visitor logs, shift rosters, was met with red tape or redacted documents. The Department of Corrections stood by its initial findings. One report noted that Turner had tested positive for HIV shortly after Darnell. But this detail, too, was scrubbed from the final personnel file. No disciplinary action, no criminal investigation. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering similar past complaints against Turner. Quietly settled, never prosecuted. Patterns emerged. Vulnerable inmates, unexplained injuries, sudden transfers. But with no hard evidence, no case could be reopened. Eventually, public interest waned. Other scandals emerged. Darnell's name faded from the headlines. But among those who knew him, and those who still remembered the flickering lights on cell block D that night, the truth never faded. The story they told wasn't one of suicide. It was a calculated act, born of desperation, fear, and shame. A cover-up sealed by silence and protected by a system that punishes exposure more than crime. In the months that followed Darnell Hughes' death, silence became the prison system's most effective weapon. The investigation had been wrapped up with a neat bow: suicide, no foul play. But outside West Ridge Correctional Facility, the truth was unraveling in whispers, protests, and slow-burning outrage. Darnell's sister, Camille, refused to let the case go cold. She partnered with human rights organizations and brought national attention to the inconsistencies surrounding her brother's death. With the help of a civil rights attorney, she filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Department of Corrections. It alleged negligence, obstruction of justice, and a deliberate cover-up to protect correctional officer Michael Turner. Though the case garnered temporary media attention, it was met with resistance from the legal system. Court motions were delayed. Evidence was classified. Witnesses inside the prison were threatened or transferred. Camille received anonymous messages urging her to stop digging into things that don't concern her, but she kept going. Her persistence led to a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) lawsuit that forced the release of partial documentation from the night of Darnell's death. Among the redacted pages were damning clues: missing keycard logs, unusual staff rotations, and internal emails referencing containment of sensitive matters. Despite the momentum, the lawsuit never reached trial. The Department of Corrections settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, with no admission of wrongdoing. The story slipped from headlines again, but some weren't content to let it fade. Independent filmmakers began working on a documentary. Podcasts dissected the case episode by episode. Advocacy groups demanded prison reform and transparency. Behind these efforts was a growing movement to expose what so often stays hidden: the abuse of power behind bars, the vulnerability of marginalized inmates, and the systems that protect abusers more than victims. Meanwhile, Michael Turner remained unreachable. Reports indicated he had changed his name, relocated to a different state, and possibly found employment in a private security firm. Attempts to question him went unanswered. Legal immunity, bolstered by the state's refusal to press charges, protected him. But guilt has a way of resurfacing. Years later, a former West Ridge guard anonymously published a blog post admitting to covering up aspects of Darnell's death. Though it didn't include direct evidence, it reignited calls for reopening the case. Camille, older and still grieving, gave one final televised interview. "They think silence erases guilt," she said. "But I live with the memory of my brother every day, and somewhere so does the man who killed him." Today, Darnell's name is etched on a mural honoring victims of injustice. His story is taught in some university criminal justice courses as an example of systemic failure. But within the walls of correctional institutions across the country, similar stories continue to play out, unseen, unheard, and unresolved. This wasn't just a case of love gone wrong or a fatal secret exposed. It was about power, stigma, and a justice system that often fails the very people it claims to protect. Darnell Hughes didn't die because of who he was, but because someone with something to hide knew the system would protect him more than it ever protected the truth. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and join our growing true crime community.